The end of globalization and a new world monetary order. That's exactly what we're seeing happen right now before our very eyes. We're seeing the end of trust, the end of the FX system, the end of the SDRs, and the end of globalization. But what does that mean for inflation, for deflation? What does that mean for markets? What does that mean for our own investments? Well, that's a conversation that I am going to have today with none other than everyone's favorite macro addict. I'm talking about George Gammon, a good friend. We're going to talk about all those things, the end of globalization, what he thinks is going to happen with inflation, deflation, what tools the Fed has to fight this, and more importantly, what's going to happen with food and food prices, what's going to happen with energy prices. We're going to talk about World War III, the war with Russia and China getting into the mix, why George may or may not be coming back to the United States because of that. We're going to talk about different ways to look at the financial network, all in hopes of trying to figure out two questions: what's going to happen next and what we should be doing with our money. Now, I do want to let you know that George Gammon is going to be speaking at marketdisruptorslive.com. There's a link down below. You do not want to miss this event. I have about 15 of the top speakers in the world in their each respective areas coming to tell you, again, what they think is going to happen over the next couple of years and what you should be doing about it. I'm talking about people like George Gammon, like Danielle DiMartino Booth, like Luke Grommen, Harry Dent, Robert Breedlove, and the list goes on. There's a link down below, marketdisruptorslive.com, if you want to come check it out. But other than that, let's go ahead and just jump right into the conversation with George. Hey, George, my good friend George, it's been a minute since we've talked. Always excited to have you back and looking forward to this. So welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think last time we were hanging out was in Puerto Rico. So it's good to see you again.
Yeah, boy. Speaking of Puerto Rico, yeah, I'm gone from there. And I saw all last week they were without power. The whole power generation went out to the whole island. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, Schiff was saying something about that as well. I think, most people, I'm sure you probably had a generator out there. Probably Cuppy and all those guys probably have a generator, but a lot of people don't, and you're just SOL.
Well, even if you have a generator, the water pumps go out and the cell phone towers go out.
Okay.
And the internet goes out.
Okay.
So your house has power, but then you have no water or electricity or internet or cell phone. So it's like still a nightmare. Crazy in today's day and age, they can't keep the power on, right? This wasn't on my list of topics, but I mean, imagine if your cell phone carrier just randomly went out, like you would go to the next cell phone carrier, right? Like they would never go out if you had competition, but the power has no competition.
Yeah, I think that's the future of California.
Yeah, and the United States. I wanted to jump in on the deep end, and then we'll kind of come back out on the other side. But jumping on the deep end is the big elephant in the world is this whole, Bretton Woods III situation that's going on. I know you've covered it. I've covered it. Zoltan's been kind of leading that. It was kind of insightful look at that. I mean, the IMF called for a Bretton Woods II agreement last year, but now he's jumping to this Bretton Woods III. I know you've been covering it a lot. What are you thinking about this? Is the world really going to be thrust into this new financial system that we're not prepared for?
I don't know. Thrust is the right word. I think the wheels have been set in motion. And so I think fewer and fewer of these central banks and governments will hold the dollar as their reserve or their preferred reserve asset or a dollar derivative, i.e. a treasury. And therefore that doesn't mean that the dollar goes away or that the dollar isn't the world reserve currency from a standpoint of transactions, but it means that fewer and fewer of these central banks like Russia, like China, Saudi Arabia, maybe Japan, hold dollar reserves. And I'm not talking about in the next 10 days, over the next 3, 5, 10 years. And what that means is that fewer dollars get recycled back into treasuries and fewer dollars that are being created outside of the United States. And that was one of Zoltan's main points is that, currently we have this system where euro dollars that are being created by the Eurodollar banks offshore, those end up on the balance sheet of these sovereigns that then take those dollars that were not produced in the United States, not created in the United States, and then send them to the United States government in return for treasuries. And so if you have less of that in the future, then you have less demand for those treasuries. Therefore, interest rates most likely go up, but you have less dollars that are not only be recycled into treasuries, but fewer dollars that are created domestically that are going outside of the United States via the trade deficit. Fewer of those dollars are being held on the balance sheets. And if you think about a balance sheet of China as an example, those dollars might exist that were created in the United States, but obviously they're not moving around with a lot of velocity. And I'm talking about if they're just holding those dollars, not treasuries.
Right.
And so you got to look at the balance sheet where those dollars exist. But if in the future they decide to hold fewer dollar reserves, then as soon as they get those dollars from the trade deficit, meaning we're importing goods and exporting dollars, they're going to take those dollars and just trade them for yuan, because that's what they have to pay their employees and their expenses. The majority of their expenses are denominated in their local currency, obviously. So then that creates a more supply of dollars that are circulating in the global economy. And more supply just means that the dollar goes down relative to other currencies. And so, again, I think it takes a long time, but because of the United States basically freezing their FX reserves, Russia, it sends a signal, probably inadvertently, to all these other central banks that, hey, if they did it to Russia, they can do it to us. And therefore, we need to start preparing and then just basically try to transact less in dollars, but definitely try to hold fewer dollars on our balance sheet. And this especially pertains to, there's a lot of levels here, but it especially pertains to countries that are produce a lot of stuff, but don't have a lot of energy. So like China, they produce a lot of stuff, but they take that stuff and they ship it overseas. And then what they do is they get assets that they hold on their balance sheet that they can use to buy what they really, really do need and what they're short of, and that is energy. So if the stuff that's on their balance sheet or the assets on their balance sheet are most likely going to go down in purchasing power relative to the stuff they need to buy in the future, it's going to disincentivize them to hold that dollar on their balance sheet if they need that dollar that's decreasing in purchasing power relative to the oil they need in the future. So that's where you start thinking about oil. That's where you start thinking about gold and other reserve assets that will most likely maintain their purchasing power relative to that energy they'll need in the future.
Yeah, that brings up a good point, because it's something that you've talked about many times, that money is not wealth, right? If you're on a deserted island with a bunch of money, and it could be $1 billion of cash, $1 billion of gold, and $1 billion of Bitcoin, doesn't matter. It's all worthless if you don't have stuff to buy. But even to that example that you use all the time, China has a lot of stuff, but it doesn't even mean anything if you don't have energy. So at the end of the day,
food and energy,
that's right, and energy and water.
Yep, that's right. That's right. That's really, you have to have that, and that's the basis of everything. And so that's why China is very concerned about their ability to supply food to the 1.5 billion people. I think that could be what these insane lockdowns in Shanghai are all about, because if you look at it just through the lens of the cerveza sickness, we'll say it makes absolutely no sense. I mean, 0 sense. When you look at it through the lens of having potential food shortages in the upcoming months due to what is happening in Russia, Ukraine, and elsewhere around the world, then it starts to make more sense. I'm not saying that's what's going on, but that could be one explanation.
That's a good point. I hadn't really thought of that. I'm going to get back into that food energy piece in a minute, but jumping back into, you had mentioned the FX reserves, right? So Russia had their FX reserve seized, and it wasn't just US dollars. It was all their currencies that they were holding through that banking system, including their SDRs as well, right? So it was kind of like, I've been looking at it as like, hey, they're trying to transition, maybe collapse this banking stack, maybe this SDR, maybe a digital SDR is kind of this next thing. But it seems like both of those were killed. And so what I was looking at, and I used the word thrust us into this new system, and that's because it seemed like trust was killed, right? We saw Canada showed the entire world that people can't trust the bank, right? A single mother gave $25 to the truckers, got their bank account seized and kicked out of the finance system. The people couldn't trust. And then just weeks later, we found out one of 3 global superpowers with nukes can't keep their bank accounts, safe. And so, as Zoltan calls it, this inside money. And so nobody, me, a Canadian, me, you, or even a superpower with nukes, can't trust money inside that system. I guess that's what I was looking at. If trust dies, then what happens?
Yeah, because any money, quote unquote money, let's call it currency, that you have, that even Russia has, is a liability of another bank. Exactly. So is it a liability of a central bank, the Fed, or is it a liability of Deutsche or HSBC or XYZ bank in the Eurodollar system? And so even if you're Russia, what we found out, and they found out the hard way, is that although that asset may be on your balance sheet, if it's a liability of someone else, you really don't own it. Like our good friend Lynette Zhang always says, if you don't hold it, you don't own it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they had to learn that the hard way. So yeah, Zoltan's saying in the future, they'll most likely, or this will incentivize them to try to have an asset on their balance sheet that not only will maintain its purchasing power relative to what they want to buy in the future, but also that isn't a liability of someone else.
Right.
Therefore, it's not possible to seize or freeze or do any of these other things that we have seen happen to the Russian central bank. And, it goes back to World War II. Something similar happened. And I can't recall where I heard this story. I wish I could. But when we dropped the bomb on Japan, I read a story that a lot of our allies really looked at themselves and said, okay, we didn't think they would go that far. And therefore, what they did is they started their own nuclear programs, because they said to themselves, okay, we're friendly with the United States now, but will we be in 10 years? Who knows?
Right.
Who knows? And I think the exact same thing happened 30 days ago, 45 days ago, whatever it was, when the United States, or the powers that be, the West, froze the FX. They kind of took the nuclear financial option. And therefore, you've got countries that may be friendly with the United States right now, but they look at what they did to Russia, same thing what we did to Japan, and say, whoa. If they're willing to go that far, I need to start preparing right now. And that means holding fewer dollars or dollar derivatives, i.e. treasuries, on my balance sheet.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like every country, I would imagine, just got put on notice, and they're like, well, shoot, if it can happen to Russia, it can happen to anybody. And exactly. When we start having these subjective things, when some person is drawing a line in the sand, I mean, that line in the sand moves. And so now all of a sudden, like, India might be considered a bad actor all of a sudden, right? Like,
India. I mean, we've labeled, I see it in the media that we're starting to label a lot more countries, quote unquote, unfriendly.
Right.
We're starting to do that to Saudi Arabia. To your point, I'm seeing this in the media regarding India. I mean, you couldn't, if you and I strategized on how to shoot ourselves in the foot,
right?
I don't think we could do as good of a job as the West is doing right now, and the United States. It almost begs the question: is it intentional? I mean, it's like Afghanistan. I mean, it's like pulling out. It's so crazy. You almost have. It sounds like a tinfoil hat thing to say, but it begs the question: okay, was that intentional? And it's like the same thing right now, especially when you look at the sanctions and the actual, forget the intentions of the sanctions. That doesn't matter, right? What matters are the results. And when you look at the results and you do a cost benefit analysis, it becomes very clear that there's a higher cost that's paid by the West than is paid by Russia. And therefore, the cost benefit analysis, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so, who knows? Who knows?
Well, it doesn't just beg the question. I mean, it does beg the question. You have to ask that question. I mean, I for sure, like I always ask myself, are these people evil or is it incompetence? And I lean way more towards incompetence. But even as incompetent as they are, I mean, come on, like you said, Afghanistan, pulling out of Afghanistan. I mean, this situation, they have to know, they have to think about that. I can't imagine they're that incompetent.
And that might have had a lot to do with the petrodollar as well. Because the whole petrodollar system is set up that saying, okay, what is it, Kissinger in 72, 74, something like that. He goes down to Saudi Arabia, the OPEC countries, and he says, what we'll do is we'll provide the military and we'll give you, quote unquote, security. and you just price all of your oil in dollars. And but then fast forward to Afghanistan. I mean, if you're Saudi Arabia and that's the deal, that the United States, their end of the bargain is giving you military security, and you see what happens in Afghanistan. You don't think you're second guessing that deal?
Heck
Say,
yeah.
wait a minute here. Whoa. Why am I, taking on all this, why am I selling all my oil for dollars when that might not be advantageous? Maybe it is. But if it's not advantageous, why am I doing that if the military promise that I get really isn't that great? And so that could play into what we're seeing today as well, with these central banks starting to say, listen, if you want our oil, we'll settle in yuan. We're not going to settle, or not central banks, but commodity producing countries like Saudi Arabia, or, there's also a deal that's been done between India and Russia, where they're going to do transactions back and forth that are no longer settled in dollars either. So, but it doesn't happen quickly. There's a lot of cross currents. And I mean, a lot of people just look at this and say, okay, well, the dollar is doomed and it's going to lose reserve status tomorrow. That's probably not going to happen. Well, it's definitely not going to happen. But as far as even happening in a short term, 1, 2, 3 years, very unlikely, because you've got those banks in the Eurodollar system that, the viewers have to remember that the dollar, being the world reserve currency, isn't necessarily just about a green piece of paper. It isn't necessarily just because it's backed by, so-called U.S. taxpayers. It's really because it's a network.
Right.
It's like Facebook. It's like, this network effect in social media. And the dollar system is this network, and therefore it's very, very difficult to penetrate that. And then you've got all of these banksters, let's call them, that are incentivized to maintain the network. They have been profiting on this network since the mid 1950s. When fast forward 10 years after Bretton Woods, and you get the Eurodollar system popping up because we weren't able to export enough dollars for the global economy to grow at maximum capacity. So they start generating their own dollars. Well, that turns into what we have today, with these global banks just quite literally printing money or printing their own profits. And if you say, hey, we want you to give that up, I don't think the JP Morgans of the world are going to be willing to do that. So, or at least not without a fight. So again, a lot of these cross currents,
That financial network, that's a good piece. I want to dig into that, but I'm gonna table that for a minute. But I love what you talk about, this Jamie Dimon and the New York Fed, because that's a piece that I've been hitting on as well, that I want to bring up, because there's something that I've been wanting to discuss with you, but I haven't had a chance. But if we could just keep pulling on this thread for a second. So Zoltan is also kind of calling for the end of globalization. I've obviously, for the last year and a half, I've been talking about this revolution cycle that we're in, right? Which is the end of globalization, and the pendulum will swing back to decentralization. So history tells us it would start happening right here. We see it now happening right here. Even Larry Fink came out and called and said, I think it was a week or two ago, said this is the end of globalization. Even Larry Fink says that, and he's a globalist. Yeah. And so, one key point is that, trying to predict where things go in the future, we're looking at, what's happening with the global economy and what is the Fed doing and things like that. Inflation, deflation is kind of that debate. But it seems like since 1971, we got a gold standard. We've printed hundreds of trillions of dollars, and we've been able to hide that inflation because of the globalization, right? But if we start deglobalizing and we supply chains start breaking down, we're onshoring things, everyone's holding their own gold in their hands, that's going to push inflation higher. It seems like, right? Because we're not going to be able to decrease costs that way. And I guess first question would be, do you think that's going to be inflationary if we're deglobalizing, as Larry Fink and I would agree with?
Absolutely. It's just a matter of timing.
Right.
I'm kind of, my base case for 2022 is that let's just assume the CPI is accurate for a moment. The CPI probably continues to go up Q2, but then maybe Q3, Q4 starts to go back down until we get a government response. And then, if we got M2 growing again by 25%, then you see the CPI start going back up again. The reason is because the aggregate demand is really going to run into some problems here with mortgage rates north of 5%.
Let me just clarify that. When you say CPI going up, do you mean like actually going down, or the rate of increase slowing down? So do you see like it's 8.5? Do you see it going down to 8 and 7.5, or do you think it increases slower?
No, I think it goes down.
Okay.
Now, to be clear, I don't think it goes down to 2 or 3 or where it was before. But I think that you see it not only take a breather, but go from, let's say, 8.59%, wherever we are then, down to maybe 8, 7.5, something like that, because a few different reasons. Number one, they're raising rates. Number two, you see mortgage rates really going up.
Yeah.
Number three, you see incomes actually going down. You see credit card debt going up. You see the inversion of the yield curve. You see also too, I was listening to Snyder and Mike Green and Emil yesterday, and Mike was, he's really into options, obviously, and he was talking about how the options on the Eurodollar futures, which basically predict Fed funds,
right?
The options that would be in the money if the Fed takes rates negative have skyrocketed in price. So this is the market saying that, or at least the smart money in the options market saying, will most likely increase till 3%, 2%, something like that, Fed funds, and then they're going to break something, and then it's going to be so bad that they're going to have to take rates negative, Fed funds negative. Right. And so that's a lot of aggregate demand that is being destroyed, or is a lot less than it was in 2020 and 2021, which brought the CPI up to 8.5% in the first place. So if you've got that much aggregate demand being destroyed, then the other component there is, well, supply. So in order for prices to continue to go up, you would have to have supply being decreased at a faster rate. Now, that's possible. That is absolutely possible, that we see aggregate demand go down, meaning people have less and less purchasing power.
That's the demand pull, they call it.
Yeah, and then you have supply, or the supply chains break down even further. We see obviously what's going on in Russia, Ukraine. That's not helping the supply chains by any stretch. And so the supply chains get worse and worse and worse. We have less fertilizer, therefore food prices go up. We have less access to less energy, therefore energy prices go up, and that filters through the entire economy, because that energy really impacts every single price, because every single thing you buy at the grocery store has to be transported there by a truck or a ship, or a combination of both that need that energy. So we could see supply go down at such a rapid rate that it goes down faster than aggregate demand, therefore prices still go up. But right now, kind of my base case is that supply continues to go down, or flatlines a little bit, and aggregate demand goes down to an extreme level, or to an extreme degree. And this gives us that CPI going from 9.5 down to, let's say, 8, 7.5, something like that. And then I think the government comes and says, we have like a market crash as an example, and the government says, okay, CARES Act 2.0, but instead of 5 trillion, this time it's 10 trillion. And that's when the Fed takes rates negative, if you're going to believe the options market on the Eurodollar futures curve. And then that's where you see inflation go from 7% to 12% to 15%. And then we'll lose something, or we'll take a little bit of a breather. I mean, if you look at inflation in the 1940s, if you look at inflation in the 1970s, it never goes up in a straight line.
Sure.
It never goes from 5 to 7 to 9 to 15 to 25. It doesn't do that. It goes up. There's a lot of volatility in the interim.
Oh yeah. I mean, just look at the chart of Weimar, the Weimar Republic, and it looks like a hockey stick straight up. But if you look in at the volatility there, it was massive amounts of volatility. So this deglobalization will be highly inflationary, but that's going to take time to play out. So in the shorter term, maybe some deflationary, and then maybe, but over the longer term.
I wouldn't say deflationary, because that would imply prices going down. I'm definitely not saying prices are going down. I'm just saying disinflation. So CPI goes from, let's just say 9 down to 7.5. So
I posted
you're still having price increases.
I think maybe if you took the core CPI, right, if you remove energy and food, I posted a chart on Twitter earlier today, and basically it showed how, because, if you look at inflation year over year, and it showed April, May, and June of 2021 were very abnormally low. There was this dip. And so then that means that because they were so abnormally low last year in 2021, then the year over year growth is going to be massive in the next month and two. So that's going to be something that could easily push, and that's the food piece, and that could easily push food, in my guess, up to 15%, just looking at year over year growth because of that.
Yeah, the base effects. Yeah.
Yeah, the base effects. And then, again, back to the core CPI, so the food and energy, the government can't print more of those things. And so obviously the 30% of the wheat in Russia, Ukraine, that's disrupted big time. But even the US, I saw a report yesterday that shows our wheat is the lowest level it's been in the United States this year as well.
And Zoltan pointed that out as well in his report, Mark. He said that he referenced some of the past crises that we've had. And one, obviously the GFC 2008. He said, well, think about the solution there. You've got a financial crisis, and therefore the Fed can come in. Let's just assume that the fix was providing liquidity, and therefore you kind of calm the markets, and everything doesn't go back to normal, but at least it kind of flatlines, and you're able to build on that with the Fed having the ability to, or a great example would be the survey sickness in 2022 in March.
Yeah.
Where the Fed was able to come in and backstop the corporate debt market through the special purpose vehicle. Yeah. And that really kept things from getting out of hand. So the Fed could do that by simply basically just creating bank reserves out of thin air. Yeah. But Zoltan's point is, okay, fine. If you've got an issue of dollar liquidity, the Fed can fix that. But if you've got an issue of no oil or no energy or no wheat or food, the Fed can't fix that one.
Yeah, exactly. So there's not a lot they can do over that, except I guess follow the China playbook, which I hadn't thought of, is maybe just lock people inside for a few weeks at a time and they don't eat.
Or at least maybe reduce I don't know if that would reduce the food supply. Maybe I was wrong there, but at least
the demand,
the demand for potentially food, but most likely energy as well. If they're thinking, it was another kind of thought experiment I was going through the other day. Is my guess is that Putin is talking to Xi Jinping. I would be surprised if they're not.
Sure.
And, it just makes you wonder if 2 or 3 weeks ago or a month ago, or whenever they went into these lockdowns, it makes zero sense that he didn't have a call with Putin. And after he gets off that call, he's like, okay, I went from thinking the probability of nuclear war was 1%. to now I'm thinking it's 50%. And if there's going to be nuclear war, then we're going to need, we're already short on energy, and we're going to need to conserve as much energy as we possibly can, because you want to talk about supply chains being disrupted, right? That's going to disrupt a lot of supply chains, obviously.
Yeah.
And so maybe that was part of his rationale. Who knows? It's a total speculation, obviously. But just throwing out another thing to think about.
Well, we know China has serious energy problems. I mean, that's some of the speculation around why they kicked all the Bitcoin miners out. Wasn't because they were trying to control their currency or control and escape from their currency, but rather it was an energy problem that they had. And we saw that they were shutting down, they were rationing energy in Shenzhen, and even shutting down the iPhone plants. And it's like, man, if you're shutting down iPhone plants, you're probably shutting down a lot of things before that. So we know they're having those serious energy problems. So, man, going into this World War III scenario, then that's interesting. So going from a low single-digit probability to a 50% probability of some sort of
that's just a guess. I have no proof that he did that, or I'm just trying to. Those Shanghai lockdowns make zero sense. So I'm just trying to, just throw everything up against a wall and just see if there's something there that sticks.
When they were shutting down, I think it was a couple of months ago, they were shutting down some of the manufacturing, claiming COVID as well. I was thinking that maybe they were using that as an excuse to cover for the fact they were shutting down manufacturing because they were short on energy.
Or they're just trying to shut it down so the U.S. gets less.
That's what I was
trying to help Russia out and just hurt our economy more, increase inflation. They know that the Fed's between a rock and a hard place. where, what are you going to do? You're going to fight inflation, or you're going to crash the stock market? And they know if the stock market crashes, then the whole economy comes down with it. So, maybe there's that component as well. I was talking to Doomberg about that, and that was one of his ideas.
Yeah, no, but it was the energy one, or to your point, I thought the same thing, maybe withholding, but not looking adversarial. So they're hurting us, but not looking like they're hurting us, kind of a thing.
Right.
So, I've been looking at this, this potential World War III from a globalist perspective. And I know you're, watching the Globalists, good old buddy Klaus Schwab and the WEF and, that whole situation, the Davos group. And, looking like this whole globalist thing was going on, I was like, well, this is probably more theater than real, because it's all, they're all part of this globalist agenda. And of course, Putin was listed on the World Economic Forum website. So was Zelensky. And so maybe this is about transferring power from the West to the East, kind of a thing. I recently had found some stuff I wanted to share with you, and I hadn't had a chance yet, but I'm sure you're well aware in 2017, Trump went to Davos and gave a speech, and he talked about how the U.S. is a sovereign nation and the U.S. would never lay down its sovereignty and will work with other nations. But my job is to think about America first. And that's when he pulled the United States out of the Paris Accord and so forth. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And that's basically what put the target on his back, right? The globalists had to get Trump out because he wasn't going to go along with it. Well, I found in October 18th, 2021, so about 6 months ago, Putin went to Davos and gave a speech. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And he went and he gave this speech, and he said, paraphrasing some, he said, Klaus Schwab's come to Russia many times. We've met many times. On this last visit, he gave me a copy of his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I read the book, and we will have nothing to do with this, is what he said. I'm paraphrasing that. He said, we'll have nothing to do with this, which for the viewers, if you don't know about the book or you haven't read it, which you probably haven't, I don't want to tell you what it says because you'll think I'm a psycho. So read the book, but it's basically this merger of man and machine, right? This transhumanism. And he went on to say, and I'll read him, quote, this is Putin talking in Davos. He said, some believe that the aggressive blotting out of whole pages of your own history, affirmative action in the interest of minorities, and the requirement to renounce traditional interpretation of basic values such as mother, father, family, and the distinction between sexes are a milestone. So he's like, hey, you guys think this is progress to destroy what men, women, family mean and like all that? He said, quote, the recipes they come up with are nothing new. The Bolsheviks followed the dogmas of Marx and Engels, and they declared they're going to change the traditional lifestyle, the political, economic lifestyle, as well as the very notion of morality, which are the basic principles for a healthy society. That's a quote. So he basically went and said, look, you guys are crazy. You're Western wokeism. Russia ain't doing none of that. Like, good luck with that. We're out, which was kind of the same speech that Trump gave. And that was 6 months ago. And he was mysteriously taken off of the World Economic Forum website about maybe 2 months ago. He disappeared. And now the whole world is like hell bent on getting Putin out of office somehow. Right now, today I saw a headline that, I don't know, some other, chemical weapons he's going to do or whatever it's going to be. Right. So that's a pretty interesting story. Have you heard that?
Not specifically. I knew he spoke at the World Economic Forum. I didn't know when, and I didn't realize specifically what he said. I mean, if that's a direct quote, I mean, he's, as crazy as he may be, he's definitely right on that.
Yeah.
I would definitely agree with him there. But I think what's going on with the global elite is really, it goes back to energy. And, I did a video the other day, and I used a chart that was on Visual Capitalists that showed the history of energy usage globally. And this went back to 1800. And the main source of energy back in 1800 was what they call biofuel, which is basically dried cow dung.
Right.
And that's what you would heat your house with. I mean, you have to cook. Okay. You got to go out to the cow pasture and come back, and or else you're not going to cook your meal.
Right.
This is pretty much what the world was like. And then we went to coal. And then from coal, you go to oil, and then oil, natural gas, nuclear, and then nuclear. Then you go to renewables. Everything in this is this chart, and it grows exponentially along with GDP and population. And especially right around the 1950s, 1960s. So when when you've got the majority of the source of energy in non-renewables, I think the global elite look at that and they say, okay, well, the population's going straight up, GDP is going straight up, but energy is the economy, like we were saying earlier. Therefore, right, if energy plateaus, then if population goes up, then the per capita GDP, i.e. the standard of living for the global population, is going to decrease. And I don't want my standard of living, this is the elites talking, I don't want my standard of living to decrease. Therefore, in order to maintain my standard of living, if we have to live on a set amount of energy, then your standard of living, George Gammon, Mark Moss, and everyone watching this right now, needs to decrease.
Right.
Therefore, your consumption of energy needs to decrease. So how would you get the world to willingly decrease their energy usage, therefore their standard of living? If you don't, Mark, the world's going to come to an end. Climate change. It's a simple sell, right? And so when you look at everything that's happening with Europe, as an example, well, they're cutting off gas from Russia. They're doing this. They're doing this. And what does the UN and the global elite come out and say? Oh, well, you just need to. I don't know if you saw the gal, but her direct quote was, or I'm paraphrasing, but she said something to the effect that, well, what you guys need to do is just take shorter showers.
Right.
When you get done, you can raise your fist and say, take that, Putin.
I used that same quote. I couldn't believe it. It was insane.
Yeah. So, I'm not going to say that they're behind what's going on with Russia, Ukraine. Maybe they are. Who knows? But I am going to say that they'll never let a crisis go to waste.
Right.
And I think their main objective, Mark, is to get us to consume less. I think they've got three main objectives. You can take all their fourth industrial revolution, all of their great reset agenda, all of the word salads and mumbo jumbo on their website, and you can distill it down to three things. Number one, they want people to consume less. Number two, they want to decrease the population, or population growth is what they would say, but the population. And number three, they want to usurp power and control. That's of course. That's it right there. Yeah. Once you understand that, you look at the war and you're like, well, wait a minute. This could definitely decrease the population.
Yeah.
Obviously, this definitely decreases consumption. This is helping them achieve their objectives. So we understand the incentives are there.
Yeah.
Then the question is, are they pulling the strings because, there is an incentive or not? And that becomes a morality question. And I would argue those global elite don't really have that strong of a ethical North Star, let's say.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't put it past them to at least encourage a war to help achieve those three objectives sooner.
Well, I mean, I would agree with you on those points. I would agree definitely that they want to usurp power and control. But back to kind of this, it's Malthusian fear spell, if you will, right?
Yeah,
he predicted that the population was going to increase so fast and the supplies were going to decrease so fast, we'd come into this cataclysmic event or whatever. But that's been proven wrong. So what we found is that as people get energy, they stop cutting trees down and burning trees. And so we help the environment that way. Burning trees is the most, the worst form of burning energy, too much CO2, and then you cut the trees down, so there's no CO2 scrubbing. But also, as people come out of poverty and come off the farm, they have less kids. And so instead of 10 kids on the farm, they have 1 or 2 in the city. And so a lot of people predict now that the world will probably cap out at about 9 billion people-ish. And because of technology, we have more supplies than we've ever had before. So I guess it goes back to kind of what we talked about.
No, because of energy. The energy, Mark, because you're
okay.
Yeah,
energy, technology, and how we harness energy.
Right. Whatever. But if you're the global elite, so let's think that through, because that's a very interesting topic that you just addressed. So if you've got the population going up exponentially, and it naturally will decrease, or the birth rate, let's say, right, decreases. Now, Bill Gates would come out and say, well, that's due to health. And therefore, I want to make everyone healthy because I want to reduce the population. And I'm not making this up. You can just go to his YouTube channel, and there's videos where he talks about that explicitly.
Yep.
But what he'll say is that it's the health going up. It's not. It's when people get wealthier.
Right.
When people get wealthier and they increase their standard of living, that's when they decide to have fewer kids.
Yep.
So then you have to say, okay, well, if wealth or standard of living is a derivative of energy, and if energy is a limited resource, if that's going to plateau, how do you get there? How do you get to a point where people will willingly have fewer kids? The birth rate will go down to what they would argue it needs to be if you don't have that exponential energy growth. You can't unless you get rid of the people.
Right.
And then that goes straight back to war, you see? And so, so it's not just the Thomas Malthus who you're referencing in this Malthusian view of the world. You're right, that was proven wrong. But then you got 1968, the Club of Rome comes along, and it's just a rebranding of Thomas Malthus. And then what they did is they have this paper that came out in 1972 called The Limits to Growth. And of course, the intelligentsia at the time, they get their hands on this and they just love that. So then MIT puts it into a computer program that actually predicts, when the world is going to come to an end, right? Based on, the Club of Rome. And, again, it just goes back to Malthus. But I want to point out that Klaus Schwab started the World Economic Forum. It was called something different, but basically started it in 1971. So in 72, the Club of Rome comes out with this paper, Limits to Growth. And then who is the keynote speaker at the World Economic Forum in 1973? The guy that wrote the paper.
Right.
So yes, they've been proven wrong, but in the mind of the global elite, they're right. They're just early. You see, and that's what you have to get your head around.
And I guess it just really comes down to this abundance or scarcity mindset, because the whole world then operated on a theory called peak energy. So we were the world would run out of energy or oil. In 2008, that was proven wrong because of technology. We found we had more natural gas and oil than we ever knew we had before. And then, obviously, I would imagine you would agree with me that technology will continue to improve and continue to make things better. And we'll have, small nuclear reactors, fission reactors, things like that. And so we'll continue to outcompete, and out-innovate.
There's a big if there.
And that's if they allow it to happen.
Well, if you're right, you're absolutely right. And this is what they get wrong. And that if we have, let's say 7 billion, see, their thing is, oh my God, you even listen to Bill Gates. I was watching one of his videos today where he's showing this growth curve in population getting up to, 9, 10 billion. And he says, this is really scary. Like he comes right out and says, this is all these people. Oh my gosh, this is really scary stuff here. But what they fail to acknowledge is that if we go from 7 billion people to 10 billion, that means there's an additional potential 3 billion scientists,
right?
Entrepreneurs,
yes,
and people that can solve these problems that don't exist today.
Yes.
And therefore, the probability of us finding someone that can solve those problems increases significantly. But we have to allow the free market to solve those problems.
Yes.
And the main way that you do that, Mark, and this probably takes us back to another topic of price controls, is you have to let the price mechanism work. You have to do that. That's so crucial. I was reading a book from Thomas Sowell the other day called Intellectuals in Society, and he pointed out that I can't remember which decade, but there's a certain point in time where the central planners in the Soviet Union were responsible for setting 24 million prices arbitrarily, just based on, Mark, what do you think bread should cost? Well, 99 cents. Sure, let's go with that.
Sounds good.
So you got 24 million items that people are buying that are set by the central planners. So is it any wonder that they couldn't allocate scarce resources with alternative uses efficiently? Is it any wonder that their society completely collapsed when you think about all the data that a free economy or free market economy gets from price signals, from price discovery and price mechanism? I mean, let's just take oil as an example. Or, I was watching a video the other night on the supply chain disruptions and how intricate they are from the Wall Street Journal. Fascinating video. But what they highlighted is the end of the supply chain that's called the last mile.
Right.
And they were going over how Amazon is what they're doing to potentially disrupt UPS or FedEx, all these other carriers that are out there. Yep. And they're doing this because they have to, because they're trying to get the time that it takes to get you your Amazon good a lot faster. They've got something called Amazon Flex, which is very similar to Uber or Lyft, in the sense that when it gets very, very busy, the rates that people make go way, way up. So this one guy was saying, like, in a normal 3-hour shift, he'll make like $50. But if the rates go way, way up, then he could make, like, I don't know what it was, like $100 an hour or something like that. And this is an example of why prices are so important, because you take a human resource, just like the gentleman that was being interviewed for this video, and you say, by the price going up, he does what? It incentivizes him to work to solve that problem.
Exactly.
Right. So if we allow, and it sounds counterintuitive, but we have to allow, if energy prices, if we get scarce energy, the prices will go up. We have to allow them to go up, even if that is uncomfortable, because what will that do? That will naturally decrease demand. So we don't have to have a war to decrease demand like Klaus potentially wants. And then it will incentivize all these billions of people to try to solve that problem. And the higher the price goes, the higher the incentive is to solve the problem. I mean, you used an example of 2008 and fracking. Well, why were we able to really utilize that technology and really refine that technology? It's because the price of oil went to $150 a barrel. If the price of oil had never gone above, let's say, $30 a barrel, would we ever have gotten the fracking? I mean, the technology might have been there, but it never would have been implemented, and it never would have been created, and it never would have been refined to a point where we could use it efficiently at a certain price. You see? So the key there is, yes, we absolutely can solve these problems. And the Malthusians, the Club of Rome, the global elite, they are all incorrect if we allow the free market to work.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes back to what you always say, high prices are the cure for high prices. So two things happen. One, people use less of that item naturally. Right. And two, people go find other options for that thing. And so that's just allowing that free market to work.
Yep.
Which has to happen.
But see, now they're coming out and talking about price controls.
Yeah, sure.
So you have price, and then what's Biden do? We're trying to do all these things with ethanol and all this ridiculous stuff to bring down the price. And you say, well, that may be good. And okay, it may be short term, but you got to look at the cost benefit analysis there. If you truly believe that the world is going to end in 2050 if we don't reduce carbon emissions, then you should be cheering for high prices of energy, and you should be, really condemning whatever Joe Biden is doing to interrupt the free market, increasing the price of XYZ good or energy source.
Yeah. And another thing that people don't probably realize, maybe most of the viewers, is that in 2008, that new technology, the fracking, not only did it unlock all this energy we didn't know we did, which then, of course, drove the prices back down, but in addition, it also was cleaner energy. And so the United States was able to cut its carbon emission by 30%
and a ton of natural gas. Yeah, a ton of natural gas. And where do we use natural gas, Mark? Fertilizer, nitrogen.
Yeah, exactly. So we were able to cut, not only unlock all this energy, not only reduce prices for everybody, but also reduce emissions by 30%, which that's a whole different conversation we won't get into. But for those that are counting that number, that was pretty big gains. And so moving people from burning coal to oil is good, and moving from oil to natural gas is good. I don't want to keep digging into that, but
what we have to do, though, what people need to realize, and the greenies and all the environmentalists out there, I'm not saying they're stupid or dumb or any of that stuff. What I am saying is that we have to not just try to replace oil, coal, etc. We have to increase the amount of energy we have. Right. We don't have to replace. We have to do more than that. We have to increase the level of energy. Because again, energy is the economy. If you have a growing population, if we want to let people free to choose how many kids they want to have, which obviously that's what we want, we have to increase the access to energy. We have to increase the amount, I should say, that we have access to. And when you listen to all of the climate people, they're always talking about, well, we have to replace gas. We have to replace coal. No. We have to, maybe we have to replace that, but we have to add to it. And if you look at that chart from the Visual Capitalist, you'll see that whenever we move to another energy source, even though it may be superior, it may be more efficient, we never reduce the amount of energy we were using from the previous source. So as an example, we talked about biofuels, going back to 1800. And I guess you'd probably throw wood in there as well.
Yeah.
But we use just as much biofuel today as we did back in 1800 when it was the primary, pretty much the only source of energy. We use just as much coal today as we ever have, just as much oil, just as much natural gas. So you see, the only way that you can improve the standard of living is not to replace the energy, but to create more of it in aggregate total.
Yeah. One good point that Alex Epstein, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to talk to him.
I haven't, but I've heard him on Tom Woods.
Yeah, he's amazing. He just wrote a new book and going to his book release party this weekend. He's amazing, but he talks about how all these measures are not about like human flourishment. So these greenies, they want to return the world back to its natural state, but the natural state of the world is not good, right? People die of heat stroke and they die of freezing cold and they die of famine and they die of flood. And it was only through the harnessment of energy that we've been able to make the world a good, habitable place for us to live.
Yeah. And ironically too, Mark, if you want to say that, okay, well, renewable energy is the future and we just need to create so much of that it not only replaces what we were using, but increases the total energy and aggregate total, I'm all for it if it's a free market solution. But what those people have to realize that in order to get to that point, we need a lot more coal. We need a lot more diesel, therefore oil. We need a lot more natural gas to even get to that point. Why? Because, if you and I were building a windmill farm in the middle of Nebraska, how would we do that? Yeah. We'd have to have energy. And this goes back to Zoltan's paper. He says that a lot of these, the ESG movement in the West, they're going to want to build a lot of windmills. Great. Where do you get the steel for windmills? Right. That would be coal. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Where do you get all this other stuff? Well, you have to dig it up. You have to dig it out of the ground, or you have to transport it.
They take diesel.
Right. So you can't. There isn't an option where we can just use less of these carbon-based fuels to get us to this utopia. We're going to have to use more of them to get to a point where renewables are replacing them, and again, adding to the aggregate total. That's the main objective.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're kind of running out of time here. I did want to say, though, something that we started talking about, which was food, right? Food inflation and food shortages. Obviously, we just spent a lot of time talking about energy, and then there's the money. Obviously, the money aspect we started talking about, will the Fed be able to control the yield curve and print more money, et cetera. Those three things. And so Henry Kissinger, you mentioned Henry Kissinger going to Saudi Arabia. Henry Kissinger warned, or not warned, but he stated, right, if you control the food, you control the people, control the energy, you control the continent, control the money, you control the world. And what's interesting, I recently found this out. I covered it in a recent video that actually Klaus Schwab studied under Kissinger and got
he was a fanboy. He was like, Kissinger was like his number one mentor.
And what is the World Economic Forum doing? And so you go back to usurping power and control, food, energy, money. Pretty interesting. Man, there's so much more I wanted to talk about. I really want to dig into that financial network piece that I really liked. I wanted to talk about. I'm gonna put a point in a couple of these, and maybe we'll come back to another point. But the financial network piece is very interesting. You see, in the United States, we had like a phone network, and then the internet was adopted very quickly because we already had phone lines. But in places like Africa, they just went to cell phones and skipped the whole phone network. Yeah. So you talk about this financial network, and we have this financial network that was set up in the 1940s, and it hasn't been updated with technology. And now there's nations leapfrogging past. That's pretty interesting. Also, another interesting point is Zoltan, he talks all about this whole system that's being changed, but he didn't talk about the technology piece. I wanted to get to that, but we'll table those for another conversation. You and I could sit here and talk for hours and hours and hours.
Of course. Yeah.
So I miss catching up with you. But anyway, with that, we're going to go ahead and sign it off. And check out George Gammon's channel, Rebel Capitalist. And he's going to be speaking at my event coming up next month, Market Disruptors Live. And I will be at his event, Rebel Capitalist, in June.
Yep.
So we'll put links to those down below. Anything else, George?
No, that's it. I just look forward to speaking at your conference, and I'm going to give a presentation around a lot of the topics that we've discussed today. So if you guys like those topics, you're definitely going to want to get a ticket to Mark's event, and I can't wait to see all your viewers and listeners there.
All right, George, thanks so much. All right, that's a wrap. Hopefully you enjoyed that conversation with George. He's become one of my good friends. We've spent a lot of time hanging out together. We could have gone on so much longer. There's so many more things I wanted to dig in with, but you'll have to stay tuned and catch him at marketdisruptorslive.com. The event's coming up quick. You can still get your tickets at a discount. There's a link down below. Do not miss the chance to come hang out with George and I in person, shake our hands, even have dinner with us. Of course, other people like Luke Grommen, Robert Breedlove, Danielle DiMartino Booth, Greg Foss, Jeff Booth, the list goes on. You can see a full list down below. Come hang out with us, shake our hand, hang out in the lounge with us, even have dinner with us. Build your community, your network. You don't want to miss this event. Check it out down below. And other than that, if you like the video, give me a thumbs up on it. And if you don't, give me a thumbs down, that's okay, but at least leave me a comment and let me know why. And that's what I got for you today, all right? To your success, I'm out.